I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is
Hard Times and True Crimes.
So I just got back from vacation. I went to Gatlinburg with my mom and my sister, and it was wonderful. But I found a case there in Sevierville.
Oh, is that how you say it? See, I've always wondered. I was saying it Severville.
I lived for a long time.
You did in
Tennessee. And I had true Tennessean friends.
Yes.
And so it was Knoxville and Sevierville.
Okay.
And
now I know. I've never been there, so.
Yeah. Now in Florida, it's Gainesville.
And that's like around here in North Carolina. We have Knoxville, but I lived in Franklinville.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I'm going to hop right into this story because it's long.
Okay.
Back in 1949, Sevier County, Tennessee, looked nothing like the mountain hotspot that it is today. There were no water parks or dinner theaters. Gatlinburg was just beginning to lean into tourism. Pigeon Forge was still a quiet little farm town. Rebel Railroad, which would later become Dollywood, hadn't even been thought of yet. There was just fields of corn and tobacco lining the highways, and overalls about as far as the eye could see. Sevierville, the county seat, is where folks would come to do their banking, pick up groceries and supplies, and catch up with their neighbors. Saturdays were the busiest. Most local folks would farm during the week, shop on Saturdays, go to church on Sunday. The area still belonged more to farmers than tourists. It was actually a tight-knit mountain community, small towns and quiet hollers. Oh, another thing is when we were there, we saw 7 bear.
7 bears?
Yes. We stayed way up in a mountain. The driveway was so steep that I wouldn't even drive it.
I would have been having a panic attack. I don't do mountains.
I went back into some really beautiful parts of the mountains this trip.
Do those bears come up close to you then?
My mother decided to do what nobody does ever.
Did she feed the bear?
Yes. She fed the bear. Not only that, it was a mother and 2 cubs. She got out of the vehicle.
Sherry.
I was like, get back in this car, because I was afraid. I could just see this mama bear coming after her, and then me trying to fight this mama bear off my mama.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
I was like, it's not worth it. But we did get some good pictures of bears, so I will have to post them for y'all.
Yes. Now that you're safe and at home, please do that.
Exactly. Yeah, everybody knew everybody, or at least knew somebody who did. Folks in Sevierville knew the names of families in Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg. We stayed closer to Pigeon Forge, but the whole time went in between Pigeon Forge and Gatlinburg because they're very close.
How many miles are between those?
I would say less than 10.
Okay, because again, I've never been. I don't like for a frame of reference. Okay.
You've never been?
No.
Oh my gosh. Okay, you got to go.
Yeah, I've never been to Gatlinburg.
So Gatlinburg had started drawing in tourists thanks to the Smoky Mountain National Park, but the boom was still years away. Law enforcement was small, just a sheriff and 3 or 4 deputies for the whole county, and only a handful of officers in each town. It was plenty because crime was rare. It was just a different time. Perry's Camp, the location of today's crime, was tucked into Flat Branch Hollow, just a few miles north of downtown Gatlinburg. It was built little by little between the years of 1928 and 1935. The camp featured a 2-story log and stone lodge with a restaurant downstairs and living quarters up top, which is still there. And people still go and stay there, and I doubt anybody knows about this murder.
Oh, wow. They will now.
Yes,
I hope you don't hurt their tourism business. Might increase
I'm actually planning on going to stay in one of these cabins. So spread around it were 11 rustic cabins. 5 of them were behind an old farmhouse from the 1850s. One was converted from an old mill near a dam, and the rest were scattered along the Little Pigeon River. Now, all of those are not still there. I think there's just the big house and then 4 or 5 cabins.
Okay.
And then there's the river that flows like right behind it. It's really beautiful. The cabins on the east bank of the river were only accessible by a swinging bridge. There wasn't even a road on that side, so guests had to carry their bags by hand and bounce in across the bridge one step at a time.
Wow.
So it was remote, peaceful. I guess it felt like an adventure.
Sure.
So Charlie Perry was a former Knoxville bootlegger, and he was looking for opportunity. And he bought that land in 1928, long before the Smoky Mountain National Park officially opened. The area, like I said, it hadn't boomed, but it was on the edge, and he made sure his camp was ready. Perry knew how to catch people's attention too, so as visitors would pull into his gravel lot, they were greeted by this old moonshine still, permanently out of commission thanks to revenuers, but
Prohibition.
or yeah, but it was a nod to the area's rougher roots.
Yeah.
Behind the main building, there was a water wheel spun, powering a ceiling fan in the dining room through a clever tangle of these pulleys and belts. And yeah, just some old-fashioned engineering that added, I don't know, a little bit of charm. But the real showstopper was this bar that was carved from a hollowed-out poplar log. Its interior was lined with copper and covered by a glass top. The clear spring water would flow through one end, keeping a handful of live fish swimming just below your drink.
In the bar?
Yes. Yes.
And this was what year?
This was in the 1940s.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Isn't it? I thought that was so cool. And the water eventually would trickle back into Flat Branch.
That is really cool.
Which ran beneath the building. If you ever go stay there, I want us to go stay in one of these cabins.
I want to. Let me hear the story first.
Inside, travelers could come and sit and sip their beer and soak it all in. It wasn't fancy, but it was definitely unforgettable.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Now, most of the camp, the stone and log restaurant, the tourist cabins, the dam, even the little powerhouse that generated electricity was thought up by Charlie Perry. People called him an armchair engineer. Not everything at Perry's camp was meant for visitors to see. There was also hidden spaces for his home brew. Inside a hollow porch post, stone steps, and even the old water wheel, Perry made 5 gallons of home brew every day and sold it for $0.25 a cup.
He was making bank.
He was. And there's a darker chapter too. So before Perry's camp rose up, there was a small country church on that land, Carswell Chapel, and it was built in 1914. It had been moved from Gatlinburg to serve this local community. But sometime around 1929 or 1930, that little church burned to the ground. Locals always suspected that he had a hand in it because as long as the church sat so close, he couldn't sell alcohol.
I'm always amazed by people who actually have the guts to burn down a church.
It was like the heart of their little community. And many of them believed, like you said, you don't burn down a church and get away with it. Charles Perry, he was born in Cleveland, Tennessee in 1879. By the time he reached Knoxville in 1908, he was 29 years old. He lived in a rooming house and worked as a clerk at a soft drink business on East Jackson Avenue. It was around that time that he met and fell in love with May Lawson McGee. She had been born in 1878 to the powerful McGee family of Monroe County. Their roots ran really deep in East Tennessee. They were pretty powerful. Her great uncle, John McClug McGee, was one of Knoxville's wealthiest businessmen. So wealthy that he donated $40,000 in the 1880s.
Wow.
To build the Lawson McGee Library, named in memory of one of his daughters who had died in childbirth.
That amount is pretty steep.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's a lot today.
So imagine.
In the 1880s, yeah. So this was a family that carried a lot of weight politically, in business, and in the Christian society of Knoxville's elite. By the late 1890s, though, scandal had broken out. May's younger sister, Alva McGee, married a man named Thomas Calloway Howard. Not long after, May started having an affair with him. The scandal lit this fuse that would soon explode in Monroe County. In 1898, May's father, John McGee, and her brother, Joe, killed 2 of Howard's brothers and a cousin. They were convicted at trial, but then later acquitted.
And were they acquitted because of her family's powerful
I'm
backing,
not really
maybe?
sure because there was a second trial in Madisonville, but tensions boiled there as well. Howard himself came to trial, now remarried to May. When he and several relatives crossed paths with John and Joe and 3 other McGee men, gunfire broke out again. This time, Charles John, which was John McGee's son-in-law, he was shot and killed, and he had actually been unarmed. And Tom Howard, May's husband, had been the one to pull the trigger. But the grand jury refused to indict him. They said that it was self-defense, even though Jones hadn't drawn a weapon. So I don't know if he was killed in crossfire or what had happened. But then in 1902, Charles Jones' brother and son tracked down Tom Howard on a Knoxville street and shot him 6 times before he ever had time to draw a gun.
So it's like the Hatfields and McCoys.
Yes. The jury again said that this was self-defense, and that finally did end the feud. After Tom's murder, May took back her maiden name and tried going back to her old life in the same part of Knoxville near Jackson Avenue. That was brave.
Yeah.
It was during that time that she met Charlie Perry. And I don't know what kind of courtship they had, but I know that they eloped to Sevier County and married on August 6th in 1918, which was 45 days after Charlie's 39th birthday. A month and a half later, as World War I raged on, Perry registered for the draft in Colbert County, Alabama. He was working at nitrate planting, making ammonium nitrate for explosives for the war effort. His draft card listed May as his nearest relative. Both of them were still tied to a Knoxville address, though. After the war, they returned to Knoxville, and Charlie opened up Perry's Lunchroom on Western Avenue near Henley Street. The area was in a bustling part of downtown Knoxville, and it was close to some significant landmarks like the L&N station and Old City Hall. So this location, it was pretty good prime property. It made his lunchroom accessible to locals and travelers. He kind of embodies that entrepreneurial spirit that was alive in the early 20th century.
Definitely.
Sadly, though, by 1927, his and May's marriage had unraveled. Charlie moved into an apartment, and May went back to Monroe County to live with her sisters. Neither officially remarried anyone else, but later Charlie did end up having a common law relationship with a woman named Josie Law. In 1929, Charlie left Knoxville for good and headed back to the mountains where he started building Perry's camp. May would stay the rest of her life in Monroe County, living with her sister Alva, who had apparently forgiven her for stealing her husband all those years ago.
That's interesting, too.
It is. In 1934, the American Clothing Company in Knoxville was hit by burglars. I thought this was pretty interesting. So they had made, because this happened in Knoxville, and remember Perry's camp was not in Knoxville. It was a few hours away. These burglars made off with $15,000 worth of merchandise, and that was a fortune in those days. So Perry dropped a tip off to the Knox County Sheriff's Department that 2 men had stashed the stolen goods in one of his cabins at Perry's camp and were planning to haul it off to North Carolina. Detectives searched the cabin with Perry's permission and found all of the clothing. His tip led to 3 convictions, and people definitely wondered, as I wonder, if he was involved with that at all.
Yeah.
But there was no record of him being involved, and no criminal charges were ever filed against him.
And I guess he wouldn't have tipped him off if he was involved. But
I would think not, but it's just such a coincidence.
Unless it was some sort of a setup he was doing.
That's what I wondered. But if it were true, it seems like Charlie did leave all that behind when he headed to Flat Branch Hollow in 1929 to start his camp. He bought land, built cabins, and went into the tourism business. And after Perry's death, they learned that he used to buy shoes in the fall for needy students at McCookville School. He would ask the teacher for a list of names and shoe sizes, and he made sure that the kids who needed them got shoes.
nice.
I know, it really is. Yeah, Charlie, he was a man of contradictions.
Yeah. Or like you always say, people are complex and there are different layers to people. So he could have done all those things and still wanted to help those kids.
Not been a terrible person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Josie Law met Charlie between 1927 and 1929 back in Knoxville. Now, this was the woman who would become his common law wife.
Okay.
And it was at this time that he had still owned the lunchroom. She had left her home in Blount County, which was actually in Cades Cove.
Oh, my friend Stacy,
Uh-huh.
they vacation up at Cades Cove all the time.
It's beautiful.
She loves it, and she's always just telling me how beautiful it is. So.
It is gorgeous. I can't imagine like how it would have been to grow up there. But yeah, she actually left there though to get away from an abusive relationship. At the time, she was in her early 20s and Perry was close to 50. It's believed that she'd started working for him, and from there, things evolved. They stayed together, though, for more than 20 years, up until the day that they both died. Once Perry got his camp running in Sevier County, Josie would move there and keep house, but she obviously played a bigger role than that. They never married, but they lived together like they were. And he and Josie were called in the community Mr. and Mrs. Perry by their friends and neighbors. So I think there was an assumption that they were married.
Because I know back then that wasn't really acceptable.
Or common.
And they wouldn't have just been, what's the word I'm looking for? They wouldn't have flaunted that.
No. Miss Josephine Law was born on June 8th in 1906. So today would have actually been her 119th birthday.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She was born in Cades Cove, Blount County. She was a little woman, short and thin. She was actually just 43 years old when she died.
Mm.
Like Charlie, she had been married once in 1937, but the marriage only lasted through 1938. During the time, Josie had a baby girl, but gave her to a relative to raise. We do know that she was afraid to raise her at Perry's camp because she worried that this man might come after her. So I think she just had a rough situation. It seems like she trusted Charlie to keep her safe. She was a private person, and whatever she'd been through before coming to Sevier County, she didn't talk about too much.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, I always hate it when, you're choosing to go live with your man over your child. I hate that, but...
She had given the baby up before she ever met him.
Oh, she had?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not that it's okay, but...
Actually...
We don't know why she did that. Maybe there was...
No, she had not. She had
Okay.
not, because now I'm thinking about the timeline. No.
Okay. I am judging her a little bit. Sorry. I just already have a hard time with that particular situation. Yeah.
Now, I do know that also, I didn't add this into the story, but her own father was very abusive to her. So she actually, when she left Cades Cove, I said she was in an abusive relationship. She was leaving her father.
Okay.
Her marriage had already ended.
Okay.
I don't know.
I'm just making the assumption she gave up the child because she wanted to live with her boyfriend, but I could be totally wrong. There could have been way more to it than that, so I'll reserve the judgment.
She and Charlie, I kind of wonder if it was his baby.
Oh.
It would have been during that 20 years. When she died, her daughter was only 12.
Oh.
So that's very interesting, unless they weren't together like that in the beginning. I don't know. But interesting.
Okay.
So I'm just thinking through that myself, actually, because I guess I had always just assumed she had her beforehand. So
it would be really cool if some of their relatives actually heard this episode and could message us and tell us.
Give us all the details.
Yeah, like I'm the granddaughter or whatever.
Yes.
I don't know.
September 20th in 1949 was a Tuesday morning, seemingly just like any other, when 17-year-old Jack Adams showed up for work at Perry's camp. He lived nearby and had worked for Charlie and Josie. Mostly for Charlie. The neon sign out front was still glowing and the restaurant door was unlocked. So Josie and Charlie lived upstairs. She had her own room and he had a room upstairs. But something felt off. It was really quiet and he didn't hear or see Charlie or Josie. And usually they're bustling around already. So the only cabins rented the night before set up on the hill behind the restaurant and the house. and it had been rented by a couple from Kentucky, but their cars were already gone. Jack didn't see anybody around and didn't want to go upstairs where they slept because he just didn't want to invade their privacy. So instead, he walked over to the other side of the river to see if Charlie was over there doing some work or something, but he didn't find him. So he went back and he just sat down on the front porch swing and waited. Finally, the Swan's bread truck pulled in, and he knew Charlie, the driver. His name was Marshall Cox because he had a normal delivery, and it was just that kind of time where everybody knew everybody and spoke. So after Jack told him what was going on, Marshall said he'd go upstairs and check on the couple. When he got up to Miss Josie's bedroom, he saw her lying on her back across the bed with her legs hanging off of the side. She had been stabbed to death in the chest. That sight would stay with him for the rest of his life, and he was so messed up by what he had seen that he did not work a job for the next 5 years.
Wow.
I saw those crime scene photos, and it was really, it was bad.
Grisly.
I can't imagine knowing them and walking up to find that in real life. It would have been horrifying. So after that, he ran downstairs and did not go to look for Charlie, but instead called the Sevier County sheriff right away. And when they got there, they found Charlie. He was in the kitchen, face down in a pool of his own blood. He had been tortured, beaten, and stabbed. They also knew he'd been tied to a chair at some point because there were burn marks on his wrist. But by the time his body was found, his hands were loose. A broken stool was found nearby that they believed had been used to beat him.
Wow.
He had been stabbed in the neck, right near the jugular. There was also a woman's slip wrapped around his neck. I saw that crime scene photo as well. And it was still there, like when they got there. They weren't sure if it had been used as a weapon to choke him during the torture or if he was still alive after the killers left and had tried to stop the bleeding himself and maybe found the slip in a laundry basket nearby or something like that.
Okay.
Word of the murders, of course, as it did, would quickly spread through the area. Hundreds of onlookers would gather at Perry's camp and turn the crime scene into a spectacle. They would look into the windows where Charlie's body was lying and just, it's always, because it was a pretty grisly scene. Charlie Perry's body was taken to Rawling Miller Funeral Home in Sevierville. After cleaning him up, they found not only the rope burns around his wrist, but he had cut marks that were all over his body. 14 superficial slashes and stabs were made just to his face and neck alone. The slashes were like somebody had been holding a penknife between their fingers and just intentionally made these small controlled cuts and stabs all along his face and neck to just torture him. The fatal wound was a deep stab just below the left side of his neck. His feet had been burned with cigarettes and matches.
Gracious. I wonder what, like, that torture, I wonder what that was all about.
Yeah.
Sounds like a vendetta.
Miss Josie Law was found fully dressed in a red checkered house dress. She had been stabbed twice in her left breast and was believed to have died instantly. Her glasses were slightly off of her face, and in one hand she was holding part of a torn rubber glove. Authorities estimated that both of their deaths were between 10 and 11 p.m. the night before on the 19th. So they didn't find any usable fingerprints. They found there was no significant physical evidence left at the crime scene. The murder weapon was missing, and even after searching along the riverbank, it was never recovered. $28 in coins and a single dollar bill were found hidden in a hot plate near Perry's body. Although he had a safe, it had not been tampered with. But there was a cigar box where Perry was known to keep cash, and that was missing, along with a .45 caliber handgun and 2 blackjacks. I don't know what that is.
Oh, a blackjack's like a stick, like a... Like a stick that you beat somebody with.
Okay, so they were gone.
Yeah, like a billy stick or something.
Got it. Okay. Authorities later estimated that between $7,000 and $8,000 were missing. Of course, there were limitations in 1949 forensics back then.
Right.
The only available techniques were basic fingerprint dusting and the visual assessments. After the murders, suspicion turned to a man named Claude Robertson, and he was arrested. Claude was a convicted felon, and he was a known troublemaker from Sevier County. Charlie had been worried about a man in the restaurant weeks earlier, and Jack Adams, that 17-year-old worker, had ID'd Claude as that person. He had just gotten out of prison. He'd been flashing $100 bills around town and had given over $900 to a friend to hide. Hermie Lee Jones and Basil Jones were also arrested 5 days after the murders. Hermie Lee was picked up at his job in Kingsport. So I used to go to Kingsport to get candle supplies. And Basil was caught walking along the road in Fall Branch, which that's over close to where the murders happened. So when the two saw each other in jail, Hermie yelled at his little brother, "Keep your damn mouth shut."
Okay, that kind of put him in the spotlight.
Hermie did admit that he'd been in prison with Claude, but claimed that he had not seen him since he'd gotten out of prison. The same day, though, officers searched the Jones brothers' home with their mother Oma's permission, and while she was there, they found a .45 caliber pistol with a serial number filed off, which is the same kind of gun that was missing from the Perry place. When officers searched their property, they found some damning evidence in the barn as well. A pillowcase marked Perry, a bank receipt, and a deposit slip tied to C.J. Perry. They also found cash, keys, and even a cord. And remember, Charlie had been tied up with that cord?
Yep.
And this matched the cord. Nearby, they also found burnt, blood-stained scraps of clothes. Claude Robertson later admitted that he had been on the Jones property when that fire was burning. A shirt collar.
That's an awful lot of evidence to leave about.
I know, what idiots.
Yeah.
I just feel like criminals are so narcissistic that they're like, we got this. And then they do the dumbest crap.
I think they go to great lengths to plan something and cover everything up. And then at the end, they all fall apart and do something really stupid and obvious.
Just pure stupid. Or they talk about it.
They always talk about it.
There was also a shirt collar that was pulled from the ashes and that had a laundry mark tied to one of Claude's sisters. So they knew that he had been there. Yeah. Now, of course, all of that led to him confessing confessing that he had been there. He was saying that he was a getaway driver, but he blamed the Jones brothers for the murder. The media caught on pretty quick to what was happening, and it became a national case. And investigators believed that robbery was the motive, but then they found out that Charlie and Claude had a history. So Charlie loaned money years earlier to help prosecute Claude in another murder case.
Oh, the plot thickens.
Yes, and there had been bad blood between them then. Also, Claude would come up to the tavern, and he came up there a lot, and Josie would always wait on him, but Charlie, he refused to serve him because he would be drunk and acting loud and belligerent. And this would embarrass Claude and make him mad. And sometimes he would cuss at it.
Yeah.
There was just a lot between them.
Just that bad blood. And obviously, a robbery, they're not going to stop and burn your feet and take the time to do all that torture. They just want your money. There's definitely a vendetta there.
Claude Robertson, he was 40 years old at the time of the Perry Camp murders. He had come from a big Sevier County farming family. There were 10 kids and a long line of police and soldiers. His own father had served as sheriff, but Claude definitely wasn't a lawman.
He was like the black sheep.
He was. From a young age, he had shown signs of cruelty. He had killed animals. And later, he just had a reputation for being violent, for drinking, gambling. Claude spent a lot of time in Newport at a place that was just known for being rough. And he once slashed his friend Johnny Hicks across the face and chest with a knife during a drunken rage after an argument. In 1940, he shot and killed a man over a poker game. He pled to voluntary manslaughter, and he did end up serving some time for that. In 1947, he was arrested for assaulting his own cousin, Moses Moore. They called him Mosey, but he never did serve any time for it. And then in 1947, he pled guilty to federal forgery charges and went to prison again, this time with Hermie Lee Jones and Robert Gunter. And these two men were later tied to the Perry's camp case. Claude was released in August of 1949, just 47 days before Charlie and Josie Law were found murdered. Claude married at 19 a woman named Reba Moore, and she was actually the sister. Okay, it's funny that it words it like this. She was the sister of his cousin Mosey that he had assaulted.
Oh.
Which means that she was his cousin too.
Yeah, I was sitting here, wait, what?
Yeah. They never had any kids.
Wait a minute. She was the sister of his cousin. Maybe she was a half sister.
Maybe.
But still.
It doesn't say that, but maybe.
It's weird. Okay.
Yeah. So they never had any kids, and they did divorce around 1939.
Good thing they didn't have kids, just in case.
But they actually stayed really close. I don't know if it was because they were cousins, but they still stayed really close. Claude farmed, he drove trucks for the county, and he worked odd jobs before he went to prison for that forgery case. From 1943 to 1947, Claude would show up at the Perry's camp to buy alcohol. And that's when, like I said, Josie was always nice to him. She would always wait on him. She was mild-mannered and just nice. And I think Charlie was like, no, I'm not waiting on him. He's dangerous, unpredictable, and I don't want him here.
So I'm going to send you to do it.
He didn't really want her to do it either, but I think she was just
going to do it because she was nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's probably the reason they had a bit. I think he was good too. Like I see pictures of him. He looked sweet as he could be, but I think he was just, he's a dangerous guy. I don't want him around here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another reason was because back in 1940, I had told you about that manslaughter case. Well, Claude shot and killed a man named Luther Ward in Pigeon Forge over a poker game. Ward accused Claude of cheating him, and it embarrassed him, and it turned into a big argument. So Claude left mad and went home, grabbed a shotgun, came back, and ambushed him on the road. He later said that it was self-defense. He said that Ward had a knife and came after him. So eventually he was found guilty of just voluntary manslaughter in 1941. But they did find out later that his wife Reba had lied for him and just about the circumstances of what had happened that night.
Yeah.
So that's where Charlie Perry's grudge kind of came against Claude because he was friends with that family. And like I said, he was the one that helped pay for the Ward family's prosecution. And then there was Hermie Lee Jones, who was 26 years old when he was arrested for the robbery and murders at Perry's camp. He was a good-looking kid, him and his brother. He had been drafted into the Army in 1943, but went AWOL after being wounded. Eventually, he was court-martialed and sentenced to 20 years. They did not play. He escaped custody, but was caught again and served time in Ashland, Kentucky. And that's where he was locked up with Claude. He was out on parole just months before Perry's murder. Basil Buford Jones, Hermie's little brother, was 20 years old. And he lived at home with their mother. And unlike either of those two, Basil had no criminal record before this.
Well, that's unfortunate that he got caught up with them.
Yeah, it really is. He had actually served his time in the Air Force, and he wasn't active duty by 1949, but he had not been dishonorably discharged or anything like that. Basil had actually had a near-death car crash about a year earlier when he and a passenger survived a fall off of a 30-foot cliff.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
That's serious.
That is serious.
Vehicles were made different back then.
Yeah, definitely stronger. They weren't that fiberglass.
The trial of Claude and the Jones brothers started just 10 days after the murder. Talk about a
That was
speedy
fast.
trial. It was held at the Sevier County Courthouse, and it drew a large crowd. People packed in there, the hallways, and they wanted to witness what was going to happen to these criminals. Judge George Shepard, he was just this no-nonsense kind of a judge. And he would say that the jury selection was really difficult because it was very hard to find anyone who wasn't impartial. So Attorney General Joe Wolfenbarger, okay, am I saying this right? Wolfenbarger. Okay. Pushed for the death penalty. The Jones brothers were defended by the prominent Ray and Irby Jenkins. Claude Robertson had his own attorney, Clyde Bogart. And all of these attorneys were really highly regarded. So it was going to be a battle.
This is going to play out like in the media then, I bet.
By day 3 of the trial, a jury of 12 all-white men, ages 35 to 60, were finally seated. Sheriff Whaley laid out all of the evidence found at the Jones property, the burnt clothes, the pillowcases with Perry's name, a pistol, a broken stool, that cord. Also, he told the court about Claude's confession.
That's a lot of evidence.
It really is. And after all of that was laid out, a private meeting was held between the defense and the prosecution, and a deal was made.
Oh, I bet. That would have been the smart thing to do.
Yes. Claude Robertson and Hermie Lee Jones both pled guilty to first-degree murder and were sentenced to 99 years. Also, as a part of the deal, Basil Jones was found not guilty, and he was released that same day. Judge Shepard did not hold back. He said, "You men are dangerous," and basically told him if anyone deserved the death penalty, the electric chair, they did.
Yeah.
And with that, the two of them were sent to prison. Now, during the trial and later through confessions, here is what we now know happened that night. It was about 11:45 on Monday night, September 19th in 1949. Perry's camp was quiet because most everybody in that area was in bed by that time. And Charlie and Josie were cleaning up and preparing to do the same thing. When Claude Robertson and Hermie Lee Jones rode up in a borrowed Plymouth sedan, and Hermie's little brother, Basil, was the driver. They had stashed another vehicle that they'd borrowed about a mile or so off of Highway 71 near Pigeon Forge, just in case they needed to take a quick getaway. Claude and Hermie Lee slipped out of the Plymouth while Basil stayed and looked out. They crept up the driveway and went into the restaurant because the door was unlocked. And then there was a light on in the kitchen. So that meant somebody was awake, and when they went in there, it was 70-year-old Charlie Perry. Now, Perry was not just some frail old man. He was strong. He was over 6 feet tall, 200 pounds. But the younger guys jumped him fast, and before he knew what was happening. But still, he was giving them a run for their money.
Yeah, but they had that element of surprise.
They did. And there were 2 of them.
Yeah.
And so they were trying to wrestle him into the chair to get him tied up. But like I said, he was giving them, they were making good progress. But then they heard something, and it was Josie. She had started to come down the stairs, probably heard what was going on, heard the commotion. And then she started running back upstairs because she probably realized, what am I going to do without my pistol? So she was running back up, and before she could get her gun, Claude had ran after her and caught up to her. He dragged Josie across the room to the bed and stabbed her twice really hard through the breast and into her heart. She never even had a chance to fight back. Then he left her and went back downstairs to help Hermie Lee, who was still struggling to keep Perry down. Perry had been fighting back and had even managed to hit one of them in the head with a wooden stool.
Wow.
But he couldn't overpower both of them. And finally, they did get him down and tied up. That's when the torture started. They wanted Charlie to tell them where he kept his money, but he wasn't giving it up. And so Claude, he starts slashing him and stabbing him in the face and the chest over and over. When that didn't work, he started burning Perry's bare feet with lit cigarettes and with matches. When he finally couldn't stand the pain anymore, he told him where the cash was hidden, and they got around $8,000. Then Claude took the knife and stabbed him as hard as he could in the neck, and would have just horrible. By the time the murders were done, it was around 11:30 at night. Claude and Hermie were ready to slip out the back door of the camp and hook back up with Basil, who was still waiting in the car. But as they went to leave, they heard a voice or voices. So some men had pulled up to the restaurant, and they had ran out of gas and were wanting to use the telephone.
Oh, no.
And they had no idea they're coming in on the tail end of a murder. So Claude and Hermie, they would later say that the men would later say that they heard a slight noise in the back of the building. And that noise was either Claude and Hermie easing out that back door, or it could have been Perry slipping loose from the chair, trying to grab that slip.
Yeah.
And hitting the floor. The men, I just don't see, I do believe that he did that to himself, because I don't see them helping him, like putting that there to ease the bleeding from his wound.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but wasn't there a theory they may have strangled him with it at some point?
Yeah, but I think they ended on he probably did that himself.
Okay. And it does sound like it.
And he had gotten out of the restraints.
Yeah.
So I doubt they let him.
If you think about it, he was pretty tough.
Oh, he was 70 years old too.
If they hadn't had the element of surprise on him, and of course, like you said, there were 2 on 1, but
right.
He put up quite a fight.
He did.
They could have been overcome if things had gone just a little bit differently.
Absolutely. And I wish, like when the other one went upstairs, that he could have got that one.
Yeah.
But
by then he was already injured.
Yeah, he was. So anyway, the men outside did notice a passing car, like going by real slow, and then they went again in the opposite direction. And of course, that's Basil circling back to pick up his brother and Claude. By 11:45, the 3 men, Claude, Hermie, and Basil, decided not to risk heading back to that car that they ditched earlier. And instead, they took the direct route to Fall Branch back to the Jones family, where their mother lived. They had blood on them. They had the stolen money. They had all these items. And they had just committed one of the most vicious crimes in Sevier County history. So they had a lot of work to do. And that's when they started the cleanup process at about 1:15 that morning. So they strip off their clothes that, of course, had blood all over them and burned them in a pile. They divided up the $8,000 they'd stolen. And then Hermie took that old pillowcase with Perry's camp stitched on it and stashed it in a barn loft. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
That was so dumb.
Claude then got in Hermie's car and headed back to Johnson City, where he'd been holed up for the past few days with a woman named Joyce Buchanan. Hermie had been up early, and because he had to be to work the next morning.
Oh, okay.
So he had to get up early. He worked at the Mead Corporation, which was a factory. Just hours earlier, like I said, they'd committed these brutal murders, and now they're just going to act like it was just another day. Sheriff Whaley and Sheriff Fisher questioned Claude, remember I had told you, and asked him straight up if he'd given any of the stolen money to Robert Gunter, because that man had already told them about the $975 that he'd gotten from him. And the envelope was marked with Charlie Perry's name.
Again, that was so dumb.
So stupid. Now, Claude swore up and down that he had not given him a dime. He claimed that he'd spent the evening of the murders with Joyce Buchanan, that woman over in Johnson City.
And she lied for him?
They made a beeline over to Johnson City and found her and brought her in. And she admitted that she had been with Claude, but not Monday night, not on the 19th.
Ooh.
When Charlie and Josie, and that's when they were murdered. And that's all they needed from her.
Yeah.
So the same night, they went back to Newport and they confronted Claude. This time he did not lie. He admitted to giving the robbery money to Gunter. He even admitted that he was there, but he claimed he had just been the lookout, that he said the dirty work had been done by the Jones brothers.
And that's always the other thing they do. As soon as they realize that the jig's up, then they turn on each other and start pointing fingers.
Oh, yeah. Of course.
But nobody's buying that from him.
And then Hermie Lee, he admitted that he knew, I told you about that. He knew Claude, but of course, he hadn't seen him since his release. But they just went to his house and searched. And in an inside bedroom, upstairs bedroom, that's where they found that .45 caliber handgun, which was the same weapon believed to have been stolen from the Perrys. Remember, I had said that serial number had been filed off, but there was one small dent on the top of the barrel, and that imperfection ended up matching Perry's firearm exactly and was the key piece of evidence that they needed.
I love that.
Just one of the key pieces.
Yeah.
Because the next day, up in the barn loft is when they found that pillowcase, which was damning. They also found a deposit slip with the name C.J. Perry on it, along with Perry's keys and the green cord that had been used to tie his wrist.
Yeah.
So if that wasn't enough, the sheriff also located the ashes and charred scraps of clothes from the clothes that they had burned.
Yeah, it's like they did nothing. Even though they burned the clothes, it's like they did nothing else to cover up anything.
So at this point, this was not a circumstantial evidence.
No.
There was plenty of undeniable proof.
Yeah.
In February of 1950, 3 months after being locked up, Claude Robertson submitted a written statement and claimed full responsibility for the murders of Charlie Perry and Josie Law. He said that he had acted alone, and that he borrowed Hermie Lee's car, drove all 76 miles from Fall Branch to Perry's camp, and did the whole thing himself. He said that he'd been drinking, that Perry had tried to throw him out of the restaurant that night of the murders, and that after some words were exchanged between the two of them, he made his mind to come back and kill him. He said that the robbery had been an afterthought. Why he said that, I don't know, because to believe that, you'd have to believe that Claude, which was not a very big man, who wasn't particularly strong, I don't believe, was able to overtake Charlie Perry, who, like we said, was 200 pounds and over 6 feet tall.
And fought really hard.
Exactly. And then he tied him up and stabbed Josie twice through the heart, and then went back to finish off Perry. Did all the torture himself. And then if that's not hard enough to believe, remember all the stuff that was found at the brothers' residence? It just doesn't add up.
It doesn't.
Claude Robertson would only leave that prison twice in his lifetime. And both times he went back to Sevier County. The first time was January 1954 for his daddy's funeral.
They let him out to go to a funeral?
Yeah. His father died on the second day of the new year. I don't think they do that anymore.
I think they should.
No. And early that Saturday morning, Claude was brought from the Nashville Penitentiary to Knoxville in handcuffs and shackles. And then he was driven to Sevierville for a very short visit to the funeral home. And he got to spend just a few minutes with his father's body by himself. But his family wasn't allowed to go anywhere near him. And I don't think he got to go to the funeral. The building and the street was under watch, and that was not to protect him or the people from him. That was to protect him from the people.
Oh, okay.
So then they loaded him back into the cruiser and drove him right back to Nashville. The second and final time Claude returned to Sevier County was 10 years later, and that was in a pine box of his own. He died in prison on a Sunday afternoon, May 3rd of 1964 at 55 years old. They buried him in the same cemetery as his parents and brother back in Sevier County. The warden in Nashville said that Claude was a model prisoner. Nearly 15 years he served there, almost 18 years he had been in prison in total, and he had literally never gotten in trouble the whole time he was there.
That's very surprising.
It is. He was older, I think, when he went in, and maybe he just gave up.
Mellowed out.
Maybe he mellowed out and realized, like, I really screwed up.
Yeah. And maybe it was the drink, because he always said he was drunk.
So.
Maybe he was just really mean and violent when he was drunk.
I really believe that's what it was.
Yeah.
Claude wasn't entirely alone in life, though. He did have his visitation record showed a small circle of people who obviously did care about him. His brother Tip and 2 sisters, Lucy and Eunice, came as often as they could. Most of his mail came from a few family members, his dad, Tip, and Lucy, but one, this was interesting. So Ruth Allen, she was the younger sister of Claude's ex-wife, Reba. And she, technically, I guess his little cousin, but she stayed in touch with Claude for the rest of his life. For years, she wrote him from all over, from Sevierville, from Knoxville, from Orange, and El Madonna, California. She and Claude exchanged letters every single month. Even after she married and had 7 children, moved to California, and eventually divorced and went back to Tennessee, but through that all, she never stopped writing him. And I don't think it was romantic.
Well, that was my question. It doesn't sound like it.
No. One of the things that were found in his possession was a church tract from California.
Oh.
And maybe she was witnessing to him.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like, maybe.
After his death, the photo album would turn up, those old black string-bound books. Do you know what I'm talking about? With the construction paper pages.
Yes.
There were 95 pictures in it, and 81 of those were Ruth and her kids.
Oh, wow.
So and then sprinkled throughout it were photos of Claude and his family. Now, he did have, most of his siblings did not have anything to do with him.
Because
he had burned those bridges.
Yeah.
There were postcards from Ruth dated 1952, 1956, a re-election card for the governor from 1954. And like I said, those little church booklets, one from the Southern Baptist Convention and a prison ministry out of California. And that was what was found that was what he had when he died. And then there was Hermie Lee Jones, who went to the Tennessee State Penitentiary in Nashville as well.
So they were at the same place?
Yeah, for a while they were.
Okay.
He was actually still on federal parole for going AWOL, remember?
Yeah.
And escaping custody. So the marshals out of Knoxville put a hold on him, and it took about a year for him to be released before he could go to Nashville. Then, less than 2 years into his sentence, one August morning, this was in 1951, Hermie Lee stabbed another inmate 3 times. This other prisoner's name was Richard West from Robertson County. He was doing 25 years for bludgeoning his own grandmother to death back in 1936. Oh. West died about 13 hours after the stabbing in the prison hospital. The guards said that Hermie had acted in his own self-defense. West was known, he was just like the prison bully, and had come at Jones with this blade wrapped in a towel. And so the grand jury chose not to indict him for that. Now, months earlier, he had begged the state board for mercy, and he had used Claude's 1950 confession where Claude had claimed that he acted alone.
Yeah.
He had 3 people swearing that they'd seen him in Kingsport that night and not in Pigeon Forge.
So he had people lying for him.
Yes. But the board pretty much just shut the door in his face. In July of 53, prison staff found a set of keys and 52 bullets hidden in his cell. He was planning to escape. And so they put his butt in solitary for over a year. When they let him out, he was transferred from Nashville to Brushy Mountain. Nearly 9 months after Claude Robertson died, Tennessee Governor Frank Clement quietly commuted his 99-year sentence, and a week later, Jones walked out a free man.
Oh, my goodness.
So what had happened was people went before the parole board on his behalf. They brought a petition signed by 9 jurors from the original trial. They claimed that Hermie Lee hadn't killed anyone, that he was just caught up in Claude's mess. Among his defenders was a prominent Methodist minister, and his name was Basil Jones.
Oh, my goodness. You're kidding me.
Now, they didn't lie, and this was separate than the other things. So this wasn't about his innocence or guilt. But the Board of Pardons said that Jones hadn't violated any rules in the 15 years since he'd been incarcerated. So I guess they totally forgot about the stabbing and then about was going to try to escape from prison. And none of that ever made it. I don't know.
And so his brother had become a minister?
Yes. Yeah, he became a minister.
Interesting.
So he did come.
But that guy was Hermie. He was violent. I think he's the kind of person that would be dangerous. So I'm curious to find out, did he stay after he got out of there? Was he clean or did he reoffend?
He walked out of Brushy Mountain a free man on February 2nd in 1965. He went to East Tennessee and lived another 37 years. He passed away in 2001 at the age of 77 in a Bloughtville nursing home. He got married. It didn't last, but he did have a son and a daughter and a little granddaughter by the time he died. He worked in a factory and retired and was buried in the cemetery at First Baptist Church at Fall Branch.
Okay, so he didn't reoffend.
Nope.
Because I really would have pegged him to be one.
I would have too.
Actually, when you said he walked out on February 2nd, I thought you were going to say, and on February the 5th, he did something else. Okay.
Last but not least, Basil Jones was just 19 years old when he stepped out of the courthouse with his mama and older brother that day. He was walking free, knowing Claude and Hermie were headed for prison. Now, Basil had spent 52 days locked up. He was facing the same kind of time they were.
Yeah.
He didn't pull the trigger, but he was part of it. He felt like he was spared by the grace of God.
I was going to say, it must have put the fear of God in him.
Yes, and over the next few decades, Basil tried his best to build a good life for himself. He married Elsie Marie Smith of Sullivan County in 1950. He stayed close to his childhood home in Fall Branch, took care of his mother. He worked a regular job at Southern Octagon Company in Kingsport. Never gave up farming because that's what he knew and loved. In the 50s, Basil felt the Lord tug on him. He believed that he was called to preach. And without a high school education, with a young family to feed and shift work on his back, he still poured what little energy he had back into the ministry. He started as a lay preacher, giving sermons in the city mission there in Kingsport, or he would do funerals or just a third string minister. But the Lord would open doors, and Basil eventually became an ordained Baptist preacher. He served several small churches and moved his family to Rogersville, Tennessee, where his mother would move in with him and where he would pastor in places like Hickory Cove, East Rogersville, the Shepherd's Chapel Baptist Church. And just when things seemed to be in a really good place for him, his brother had gotten out of prison. He probably felt he could breathe.
Yeah.
In the summer of 1974, his 14-year-old son, Timothy Will Jones, was playing on posted property with his friends, just boys being boys. And they were exploring this cave near Hickory Cove where Basil preached. From 300 yards away, this 26-year-old man mistook him for a groundhog.
Oh, no.
And shot him with a rifle and killed him.
Oh.
Less than 4 months later, Basil's mom passed away. So that's two heavy losses, one right after the other. And had it not been for the Lord and his wife, it would have been hard to survive those dark days. But eventually his love increased even for the Lord, and he grew to even be overjoyed again because he knew that he was going to see his boy and his mother again. In 1988, after 38 years of marriage, his wife Elsie died at 59. That was another hard blow, but he was remarried to a woman named Lucy who loved him and was by his side when he passed away in 2007 at the age of 77. The Wholesome Valley Baptist Newsletter remembered him as a beloved pastor, a respected fellow servant, and an encourager in the faith and dedicated soul winner. Just to wrap it up, poor Charlie, he was 70 when he died. He did not have children. His siblings were all in their 60s. He had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and most of them lived in Chattanooga. Josie was his common law wife, but had died minutes before him. So remember that. And Josie, she did have people that loved her. She had her brother, their spouses. It was just really sad. She ended up being buried beside her mother. They did not get a thing. This is so crazy to me. The reason they didn't get anything is because her property, her personal items, even her quilts that she made, all legally went to Charlie because they were common law spouses, and he outlived her by a matter of minutes. So when he died, everything he had and she had passed to his estate, which was this cruel technicality. And so his family got everything and her family got nothing.
And the thing that we all know, the thing to do would be at least give her family what was hers. But I'm sure they didn't do that.
No.
Yeah, I have some friends that in the past few years had a similar situation. It was a remarriage. The man and woman were remarriages, and so they both had kids of their own. They didn't have the stuff set up the way it needed to be. And so she died just, I think, weeks, maybe a few months before he did. And her kids, all her stuff went to her husband, and her kids didn't get what they deserved to get. And his kids, instead of doing the right thing and saying, oh, that was your mom's, did not do that. And they just took everything. It was really unfortunate and very sad. And just, I really hated that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah. So the lesson there is make sure you have your will and stuff set up the way you want it.
Make your wills. Absolutely.
But I digress. Go ahead.
Then there was Claude's family. They had sat in courtroom after courtroom before with him. It was 8 years earlier. He'd been on trial for killing a man named the word guy. His mother had endured the trial and the one before it. They showed up for him during this ordeal, as they always had, even though Claude had worn his family down. But he had family members who just could not give up on him. The Jones family, Hermie Lee and Basil, they weren't alone. Their mom, Oma Jones, she wasn't even from there, but she drove 76 miles away, and she was at that courthouse for them during the whole thing. And also, that 99-year sentence really hit her hard. That was her son. And she had already seen one of her sons go to prison for 20 years.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Oma visited Hermie Lee faithfully both at Nashville and Brushy Mountain for his 15 years behind bars. When it came time for his other hearing, the commutation, is that what it's called?
Yeah, commutation.
That hearing in 1964, she was there ready to testify on his behalf. And she lived long enough to see him walk free. She ended up getting to see him start a family and to get married. And I imagine that Basil spent the rest of his life repenting. He was a model son, a model citizen. But it just got me thinking at the end of this, their murders left a mark. I imagine that Claude, Hermie, and Basil thought what happened that night would stay between them and would be their secret. But sin doesn't stay put.
Nope.
You cannot contain it. And like muddy water, it just spills out and seeps into places it was never meant to go. It affected 4 families. Not only that, but a whole community. And it would last for generations. And that's the nature of sin. It always costs more than we think. And it always reaches further than we plan for it to go. But the part that I don't want us to forget is that sin may have marked the beginning of the story. But I'm so grateful for the next chapter of Basil Jones' life, because just like sin once spilled out and affected so many, so did his redemption. That verse in Romans says, where sin did abound, grace did abound much more. And so no matter how deep the pit, grace does run deeper. And I think of all the lives that were changed through his repentance.
Oh, and just think of the people that may have come to the Lord through his preaching.
I think we forget sometimes that Jesus didn't just die for the decent. He died for the violent, the murderers, for the ones who are shamed because they know that they're guilty.
Yeah.
And when Basil surrendered his life to the Lord, the angels rejoiced. And I believe with all my heart that if it had been Claude or Hermie instead, that same celebration would have broken out in heaven, because Jesus didn't die for the ones who just slip up or stretch the truth a little. He died for the ones who carry real shame.
Right. I know in heaven, there's going to be a lot of people who were murderers and right along with us who think we're not so bad. When we really
Yes.
are wretched too.
Absolutely. The cross wasn't meant for the mildly guilty. It was meant for all of us, not because we deserve it, but because Jesus paid for it in full.
Yes, absolutely. That's good. Those were some hard times.
Yes, they were.
If you would like to support the podcast, you can click the Buy Us a Coffee link on our show notes or on our website. Your support helps us keep the podcast going, and we appreciate each of our listeners so much.
You can also rate and review us on Apple and Spotify. Follow us on social media, and don't forget to tell your friends and family about us.